Despite its very industrial appearance, the Class 70 has been one of my favourite diesels since its introduction back in 2009. Bachmann's first model incarnation from 12 years ago captured the appearance well, but still had room for improvement. So how does the 2023 version fare, and does it address any of the shortcomings of its predecessor? It's time to take a closer look. Thanks for joining today's review. We'll kick off with a quick unboxing and then get into our usual close-up views. We'll then get into a running session, followed by a summary, scoring and final recommendation. As part of the scoring, we'll do a comparison with the original 2011 model to see if there has been any real improvement. Okay, let's get into it. Hi, let's get into the unboxing. So we're looking at this Class 70 from Bachmann. It's the 70811 locomotive. This comes sound fitted, and it's in this colourless rail freight livery, which is one of my favourite liveries. So we're going to get this guy out of the box. It comes in the standard Bachmann boxes, I guess, and we'll talk about that in the context of a locomotive, I guess, of this quality and price range, whether that's fully appropriate. And I think probably needs a little bit more, is how I'd maybe describe it in terms of protection. This is not a cheap locomotive, so it does warrant, I would say, the best in terms of packaging and protection. So let's take a quick look at what you get out of the box in terms of information. So there's usual product maintenance. We've got the usual information on opening the body, for example, if you're going to fit a decoder, if you get the non-DCC versions, and the usual kind of breakdown. It's pretty small, actually. There's not a lot in that. And then let's look at this, which is a sheet which talks about the functions, and we'll see these when we get this onto the track. And probably nothing outrageously different there. Some things like a station ambience, which is kind of nice, as well as some extras. So we'll see that later on. So it's a pretty small sheet though, and I guess this is for what you're paying for a locomotive like this, I kind of would expect a little bit more. It's fine if you're very experienced and you know where to go to get the information, in terms of looking up the lock sound manuals and all that kind of thing. But if this is your first model with sound like this DCC model, I think you want a little bit more, to be honest. So it's a common complaint I have for these kind of models in terms of, I guess, how much information you get. So I think let's just take this guy out of the box because he looks really fantastic. Looks quite splendid. The weight doesn't appear excessive, and we will weigh it, of course. And I guess the problem I did have on the last version of this was that it was a little bit on the light side, which might be a surprise to people. So let's get this guy out, and there we go. Put that away. Okay, so let's start taking a look at this, and it is a magnificent looking model. Will be interesting to feel the weight. It doesn't appear to be excessively heavy, but we will discover that. Now the buffers are kind of interesting there. They're kind of quite recessed. I didn't notice that before. There is a driver. Thumbs up to that. That is good. Again, those very interesting buffers on the end there. They're really quite receded, which is kind of interesting. I don't think I noticed that in the last model. The overall level of detail is really, really good. These models have the modified air intake. Obviously, that's what all the new versions of these now have. The glazing on the cab area there looks it's very clear. It's extremely clear. You can see right through. Now there isn't a lot of detail in the cab that I can see there. We might get better views of that when we get close up. So it doesn't appear to be massive detail in the cab. It's functional. It's got the seating and stuff like that, but there really isn't a lot of other detail going on in the cab area. This would be different to say some of the Acura scale models, for example. The glazing is nice, and the window frames, I like those. Separately fitted wipers. We'll see the light up here, obviously, as part of the lighting package. She comes with coupler on one end and no coupler air dam on the other on the driver's side. That's fine. I like models to come like this out of the box, to be honest. I'm kind of happy that for me, I'll just like take this and run with this now. It's fine. I don't have to go fiddling around. So that's good. The upper body detail is always pretty good on these. There's like a mass of labels on these things. There's like, I noted this on the original Class 70 that I reviewed a number of years ago, and it's just this massive labeling and kind of little detail for all the different panels and all of that. A lot of stuff going on there. So that's it'd be interesting to see this again close up and to compare it to the previous model. The previous model I have is actually a Freightliner, but you know, that kind of level of detail, apart from the livery, that same level of detail should kind of apply. Underbody is a little bit simple there. There's not a lot going on there. You've got the tanks underneath. You've got little switches to control the lighting, which is no harm. So you can turn off, you can go into a train mode, you can turn off the rear lighting, which is good. You can turn on and off the cab lighting there. That's always good under DC. So I think, you know, there is, as I say, a lot going on. It's a physically large model. It's a physically long model compared to others. I do kind of like it. It's kind of got this industrial kind of functional look about it, which I don't know, I kind of like. So yeah, this looks pretty nice. I'm kind of keen to get this on the track now. We will do the normal close-ups, of course, and 360 view on it, and I will do a comparison with its predecessor. So we'll do that. Just take a look underneath. The bogies look pretty good. Some nice detailing on the bogies. Looks like all-wheel pickup and all-wheel drive, which is kind of what you'd expect from a model like this. So I'd expect on the performance front it would be pretty good. I actually did find the other one pretty good, to be honest. Its predecessor. So this looks like a very nice model. Very nice rendering of the livery, and it's got the kind of things you'd expect, I guess, in a model like this. And the next thing is really to see how she performs and how she sounds as well, because given that this is a sound-equipped model out of the box. Not cheap, I guess. I think I need to make that point. So the bar is high on this, and we'll see, does she live up to that when we get it onto the track? And say when we look at the close-up views as well, and also listen to the sound. But overall, a good start out of the box, and looking forward to going through the rest of the review and seeing how she performs. Okay, let's get into the close-up view. So we'll start with the cab end, which actually does have a driver, which is great. That was also on the original model, and it's welcome to see it here. The cab area does have a number of elements in it, but it's not very detailed, and it has not improved since the original model. All of the kind of upper body is on a par with the original version of this from 12 years ago, at the same sort of levels of detail, and they are very good. I'm very pleased with them. The underbody there is rather bland. Again, that was akin to the original version of this model, and it is in line with the prototype. There isn't really an awful lot going on there on the actual real-life prototype of this particular locomotive. Now, in the underbody there is some visible wiring and copper pickups, etc., and that's common to a lot of Bachmann locomotives, unfortunately, so we do have it here as well. And again, this end of the model actually looks really nice as well. Nice glazing as well around the cab. Seeing it from the top now, we're going to do a rotate around. So the roof is essentially equivalent. So this model, from an appearance perspective, to be honest, apart from the different livery from my original Freightliner version, everything else is identical. So this has not changed in the 12 years since it was introduced. Certainly nothing that I can see. The only change is really the Cullis rail freight livery and the air intake changes that were done. They were done as part of the last run of this particular model a number of years ago. So we're getting some good views of it here. We've got the lighting at the front there, the separately fitted wipers. We've got the air dams pre-fitted with the coupler at the back. I don't have any problem with that. It's quite nice to get that out of the box. And the roof level here probably doesn't have quite the same level of detail as the Freightliner. It is the same. Everything is the same, essentially the same plastics, etc. But because you've got the green element on the Freightliner being called out, it does actually look a little bit more detailed. So now we're going to get into the running session, and we're starting off from a slow kind of crawl here. We'll pick up speed pretty quickly. And I guess a point to make on this running session is that really this model does run pretty well at low speeds in general. There is an issue, which I'll talk about in a minute. But in general, it does have good low speed performance. It has good control linearity under DCC. So at 50% power, you get, roughly 50% speed. And that's all through. That kind of follows from the low speeds to the high speeds, which is good to see. It also achieves roughly about 85 mile an hour scale speed. So you do have to tune that back a little bit, which is no harm, but it does have a little bit of headroom on the top speed, which is never any harm. So the running performance generally is very good. There's no issues over point work. I've run it over the radius 2 and radius 3 without any issues, and so no problems there. And as I say, no problems over any point work diamonds, etc., which is kind of what you'd expect. And a good high-speed performance as well. Now I haven't loaded it very heavily here, but it does have a pretty good level of pulling power. Now you're probably seeing the lights flicker there a little bit, and this is the issue I have with this particular model. There is no stay alive capability on this. It does brown out like that. It did stop fully once for me, and I actually needed to physically push the model to get it going again, which is really poor. And that was after having cleaned the wheels twice and having cleaned the track. It is particularly sensitive to dirty track or dirty wheels, and again that's because there's no stay alive in there. So this is running with the Zemo DCC Sound decoder. And for some reason that doesn't seem to be performing as well as the Locksound 4 that I had in my original model, which was an aftermarket edition. And the sound file, which was a House sound file on that original Locksound 4, was much better than the sound file on this. And we'll talk about that when we get into the scoring. Okay, so let's get into the summary. So we've been looking at the Class 70 with the air intake modifications, 70811 in the Cullis Rail Freight livery. Comes in two versions, DC Ready version 31591A and the DCC Sound version 31591 ASF. Comes with what they describe as a powerful 5-pole motor with twin flywheels and a powerful, in inverted commas, talk about that later, dual bogie drive and all-wheel pickup, which is good. They've got new dual end pockets with a coupler fitted at one end and an air dam at the other end. Other features are the fitted driver, the sprung buffers and a detailing kit. And the sound version includes the Zemo MS440C DCC Sound decoder. Now the directional and cab lighting we have, and these are identical to the previous releases of this particular model, as are the dip switches for DC running, the day-night control and the rear light as well. And those actually take effect under DCC as well. Top scale speed that I tested was 96 miles per hour. That was at 100% power, and that's with the CV5 set to maximum and 180 milliamp peak current. So obviously that 96 miles per hour is not prototypical, which would be 75 miles per hour. So you can tune this down, which means obviously your peak current will drop as well. Gives you a bit of headroom in terms of capability there. Unboxed weight is the same as the original, 443 grams, which is a little bit disappointing. And then the retail selling price, DC Ready, goes from anything from 212 to 249 to £50, which is the RRP, and the DCC Sound correspondingly more, 297.45, which is what I paid, to 349.95 as the recommended retail price. And both of those are as of August 2023. And I do have an issue with those prices. I think they're a bit high. So let's get into the scoring. So the running performance, I'm giving it an 8 out of 10. And that's because of the stalling. That's just a critical flaw. I don't know where it's come from. I don't know, is it an artifact of the Zemo? The Lock Sound 4 certainly seemed to work better, but that was an aftermarket edition. The performance just isn't there. I mentioned good DCC control linearity, which is there, good low speed in general performance, but the stalling is the killer. That's always worth 2 points on running performance because you just can't have it. That's actually gone down since the original. It's got worse. Didn't ever see that on the original model I tested, so that's very disappointing to see that. Appearance in detail, I'm giving a 9.5 out of 10. I think I give the original 10 out of 10. The upper body is still very good. I think there are those issues with appearance on the bogies, as I mentioned, in particular the visible copper areas, the wiring. You really don't want that on a model, so I think there could be improvements there, and you could argue that there could be improvements in the cab area as well, for example. It's still very good overall from an appearance perspective, but there are a couple of niggles there. This was a sound-fitted model, which we've just been reviewing, which I've tested. I'm giving that a 6 out of 10. That's not good, and you heard it. If you watched the full running session with the sound to its full level, you'll see why it's that score. It's just not very good, and it's a good bit worse than the original aftermarket version, the Hose sound that I got on the original model when I purchased it. That's way better than this. So this is not a good sound package at all. Extras and variants. As far as I'm aware, this is the only version that's been sold right now. There was the Powerhole version that was there previously. I give you an 8 here. There are extras like the driver. There's reasonably good lighting and lighting control with the dip switches. And there's a good detailing kit. So I think 8 out of 10 is not too bad. The build quality, I'm dropping a point or an extra point here. I think it does have a light feel overall and a kind of a slightly delicate feel to it, if you know what I mean. I think this model could do with a heavier weight in it. And also the motor it's a noisy motor. When you put a model on the track for the first time and run it, even prior to being run in, some models are out of the box ultra smooth. This model was rough out of the box. Not necessarily in the performance. The performance was kind of okay, but the noise from the motor is just rough. It just sounds rough, and even after it's run in, it hasn't improved in any way significantly. And I know that in the past, I did get feedback on the previous review I did of the original model that for some people they were having problems with the motor. The motor was failing. I'm docking some points here. I think the quality hasn't improved at all. The motor is the same as it was basically. And there are a few of those little build quality issues again that affect the appearance in terms of the underbody, as I mentioned. They're just things that, shouldn't be there. But the big one for me on this is actually the motor. Packaging documentation is, as it is typically, this might be normally maybe an 8.5, but the documentation on the sound was really poor. I mean, this comes with built-in sound and you get a single sheet. And then the overall value at the price I paid, which is just under £298, it's a 5. A 5. Like, this model is pretty well the same model, apart from the air intake changes that were done on the last respin of this. And they already had done the livery for Cullis Rail Freight on the last spin of this. There's nothing extra in this. It's actually gone backwards. The sound is worse. The original version I had, which, as I said, was an aftermarket sound offering. Maybe if you got it out of the box at the time, it might have been the same. But the running performance, it's stalling. And they've done nothing. They've not changed the weight. They've not changed the motor. The cab area is the same as it was before. It's the same model as it was 12 years ago. And they're charging £300, and that's the discounted price. Like, it's $350 if you get a full RRP. I'd expect a retooled version for that, with stay alive capacitors, etc. installed, and detailed cab area, all that kind of stuff. That's what I'd expect for that sort of price. It's bad value. It really is. And whether you get the DCC ready version at $212, which is still not great value, unfortunately, it's a 5. You could say it's even worse. So overall score is 7.4 out of 10, which is poor, really poor for a Bachmann diesel to be scoring 7.4. And if you exclude the price value, it ups it a little bit because obviously the value score is not good. So I think what we need to do next is actually take a look at the feedback from the original review. Let's take a look at that for a minute before we go any further, and it'll kind of give you an idea. Improved weight. Basically said when I reviewed the original model that it should be at least an equivalent weight to a Class 66, and probably more. So that means at least an extra 100 grams on top of what we have. And that hasn't changed. They haven't improved it. Address any motor issues, and some people did have issues with the motor, and at the time I commented it might be manufacturing batch issue, for example. But this is a rough motor and it doesn't fill you with confidence. When you've got the sound on, you don't really notice the sound of the motor itself, and it performs quite well apart from the stalling. And the stalling is an artifact of the overall electronics. It doesn't have any stay alive, for example, which isn't acceptable for a model of this price. The next item I talked about was improving the underbody detail, and really there isn't an awful lot to be done here, but I would like to see the bogies cleaned up. In particular, get rid of that copper that's in view and any visible wiring. That there's red wiring. Like, at least if it was black you wouldn't notice it, so something like that. Enlarged speaker cavity, they've done nothing to the internals. It's the same as it was, and the access to the DCC socket is still a challenge. I will put a link in the description to a video on upgrading the DCC Ready version to Sound and what you need to do. They haven't improved this. Basically said a top quality DCC Sound option. What they've given with the Zemo is not top quality. It's poor. And I wouldn't recommend you go near it, to be honest. So again, another recommendation that they really haven't done anything about. So very disappointing to buy a model 10 years on that hasn't moved on in terms of improvements. Looks like Bachmann are just treating it like a cash cow at this stage, which is disappointing. So the next slide I want to take a look at is the weighted scoring of the original version versus this version, and just see where these numbers have gone. So the running performance is lower because of the stalling. We didn't have that on the original version. Appearance and detail has dropped a little bit because obviously things have moved on as well in the intervening period of time. I hadn't really noticed the copper and the wiring on the original review. If I had, I would have probably scored it the same. So that's probably the same. I didn't score sound on the original because it wasn't the out-of-box version of sound, so I can't give a score for that. But the sound here is poor. It's just poor. It's a 6 out of 10. Extras and variants, it's an 8 out of 10. Build quality 7. And again, that's dropped. Again, I didn't notice the motor as harsh on the original version as on this. So again, that's a disappointment that that's the case. And then packaging documentation is the same. And then price value was way better on the original than it is now. And that's, they've upped the price without adding anything to the capability. So again, overall, the original version is beating this by anything between, 3/4 and a full point. That's significant. It really is. It kind of says you'd be better off with the original version. This third release of the Class 70 from Bachmann is one of the most disappointing models I've reviewed this year. With a recommended retail price that puts it in the premium model category, I wasn't expecting a model that performs both worse than the original models from 12 years ago and comes with a very poor sound package. Far from address any of the areas I highlighted in my original review, Bachmann have released an inferior model at a totally ridiculous price. A poor sound file and speaker combined with the rough sounding running performance that seems to be hyper intolerant to any dirt on the track is a far cry from most of Bachmann's other diesels and equivalent models from the likes of a Curascale. If you're a fan of the Class 70 like I am, and you've been desperate to get the most contemporary livery, you probably have no option but to go for this model. If so, go for the DCC Ready option, where you can add your own sound decoder of choice with a stay alive capacitor and a decent speaker. While it may cost you a bit more, it will address the two biggest issues with this model. The motor will still be on the rough side, but with the sound turned on you won't hear it, and the overall running performance is good once you don't have the dropout issues that I had. To others who've been looking at this model, I would advise you look elsewhere, as there is much better value and better engineering to be found. This is one of the poorest models I've seen from Bachmann in recent times, and is best avoided unless you are a particular fan of this class. So thank you for joining today's review. If you found it of use, please hit a like. Unfortunately, it has been a rather negative review today, and hopefully my next review will be a little bit different. I have received the Class 37 from a Curascale, despite some issues with customs. So I'll be going through that over the next few days, get a running session out, and we'll be reviewing that in due course. So please join me for that. Look forward to seeing you on that one. And in the meantime, take care and happy modelling.